Rulers and buildings. Class 7 Social Studies. In medieval period, rulers built private and public buildings like forts, palaces, tombs, temples, mosques, tanks, etc. Between the 8th and the 18th centuries, kings and their officers built two kinds of structures. The first were forts, palaces, garden residences, and tombs, and the second was structures meant for public activity including temples, mosques, tanks, bazaars, etc. Merchants and others also carried out construction activity. They built temples, mosques, and wells. The technologies used in the monuments are unique. It requires sophisticated skills in making a large room with an elaborate superstructure. Rulers expected to win the praise of their subjects. Merchants and others also carried out construction activity. They built temples, mosques, and wells. The technologies used in the monuments are unique. It requires sophisticated skills in making a large room with an elaborate superstructure. Between the 7th and 10th centuries, architects started adding more rooms, doors, and windows to buildings. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, the Trabeate style of architecture, in which roofs, doors, and windows were made by placing a horizontal beam across two vertical columns, was used in building temples, mosques. The early 11th century temples were decorated with elaborately carved sculptures. And the temples had shikhra too. From the 12th century, two technological and stylistic developments came to be noticed. Firstly, the weight of the superstructure above the doors and window was sometimes carried by arches. This architectural form was known as arcuate. Secondly, limestone cement was increasingly used in construction. Temples and mosques were built to demonstrate the power, wealth, and devotion of the patron. The largest temples were all constructed by kings. The other, lesser deities in the temples were gods and goddesses of the allies and subordinates of the ruler. According to an inscription, the Rajrajeshwara temple was built by King Rajrajdeva for the worship of his god, Rajrajeshwaram. Here, it is worth mentioning that the name of the ruler and the god are very similar. The king took the god's name because it was auspicious and he wanted to appear like a god. But Muslim sultans and padshahs did not claim to be incarnations of God. However, Persian court chronicles described the sultan as the shadow of God. Why were temples destroyed? Since kings built temples to demonstrate their devotion to God and their power and wealth, they attacked and targeted these buildings when they attacked one another's kingdoms. In the early 11th century, when the Chola king Rajendra I built a Shiva temple in his capital, he filled it with prized statues seized from defeated rulers. Engineering skills and construction. Monuments provide an insight into the technologies used for construction. Between the 7th and 10th centuries, architects started adding more rooms, doors, and windows to buildings. Roofs, doors, and windows were made by placing a horizontal beam across two vertical columns, a style of architecture called Trabeate or corbelled. The technological and stylistic developments from the 12th century are arcuate architectural form and use of limestone mixed with stone chips that led to faster construction. Assimilation of Indian style with Persian style of architecture was prominent. Gardens, tombs, and forts of medieval age. Under the Mughals, architecture became more complex. Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan were personally interested in literature, art, and architecture. Babur got gardens called Chahar Bagh, known as 4 gardens built in Kabul. They were further constructed in Kashmir, Agra and Delhi by Akbar, Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Akbar's architecture is visible in his father, Humayun's tomb. Under Shah Jahan, Mughal architecture was fused together in a grand harmonious synthesis. The ceremonial halls of the public and private audience, Diwanai Khas and Diwanayam, were carefully planned. Shah Jahan adapted the Chahar Bagh technique in the layout of the Taj Mahal, the grandest architectural accomplishment of his reign. Expansion of structural ideas. As construction activity increased between the 8th and 18th centuries, there was also a considerable sharing of ideas across regions. In Vijayanagar, for example, the elephant stables of the rulers were strongly influenced by the style of architecture found in the adjoining sultanates of Bijapur and Golconda. In Vrindavan, near Mathura, temples were constructed in architectural styles that were very similar to the Mughal palaces in Fatehpur Sikri. The creation of large empires that brought different regions under their rule helped in this cross-fertilization of artistic forms and architectural styles. The Mughals adopted the Bangla dome in their architecture. Rulers offered patronage to the learned and pious people. Rulers also built tanks and reservoirs and got praise. Sultan Iltutmish won universal respect for constructing a large reservoir just outside Delhi Kurna. It was called the Hanji Sultani or the King's Reservoir. Kings built temples, but they often looted them while attacking one another's kingdoms. In the early 11th century, when the Chola king Rajendra I built a Shiva temple in his capital, he filled it with prized statues seized from defeated rulers. Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni attacked the temples of defeated kings and looted their wealth and idols. Under the Mughal rulers, gardens, tombs and forts were built. Babur was interested in planning and laying out formal gardens, placed within rectangular walled enclosures and divided into 4 quarters by artificial channels. These gardens were called Chahar Bagh, known as 4 gardens, because of their symmetrical division into quarters. During Akbar's reign, tomb architecture became important. His architects turned to the tombs of his Central Asian ancestors, Timur. The central towering dome and the tall gateway, Pishtak, were important aspects of Mughal architecture, first visible in Humayun's tomb. During Shah Jahan's reign, huge construction activity was carried on in Agra and Delhi. Shah Jahan's audience halls were specially constructed to resemble a mosque. He adapted the riverfront garden in the layout of the Taj Mahal. Here, the white marble mausoleum was placed on a terrace by the edge of the river, and the garden was to its south. Shah Jahan developed this architectural form as a means to control the access that nobles had to the river. In the new city of Shah Jahanabad that he constructed in Delhi, the imperial palace commanded the riverfront. Only especially favored nobles were given access to the river. The Mughal rulers were particularly skilled in adapting regional architectural styles in the construction of their own buildings. In Bengal, the local rulers had developed a roof that was designed to resemble a thatched hut. The Mughals liked this Bangla dome. In Akbar's capital at Fatehpur Sikri, many of the buildings show the influence of the architectural styles of Gujarat and Malwa. Thank you.